Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us to discuss this important case study in deepening American Muslim political engagement. I'm Dalia Mogahed, and I direct research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. We provide objective research and education about American Muslims to support well-informed dialogue and decision-making. Today, we're going to learn about an important story from Virginia, where a group of American Muslims significantly deepened the community's civic engagement. We're also going to learn how these strategies can be reapplied in other contexts, and specifically how they may have some commonalities with the recent Georgia Senate runoff race. Before jumping in specifically to the case study we're going to discuss today, I wanted to just kind of lay the groundwork with some ISPU research on American Muslim civic engagement more broadly. So the first thing to keep in mind is that American Muslims have made huge strides in things like voter registration. So we know that in 2020, 78% of American Muslims said that they were registered to vote. And that is a significant increase from 2016, just 5 years ago, where only 60% of eligible American Muslims were registered. We also know that the difference between folks who say they will vote but aren't registered, and folks that say that they are actually registered has decreased, meaning that most people now who say they intend to vote are actually registered, and that is a significant difference from 2016. The other thing to keep in mind is over and over we find that regular mosque attendance, just like regular church attendance, is linked to greater civic engagement. And Muslims are mostly focused on domestic issues. And we've seen this whether we looked at it in 2016 and again in 2020, where the top issues are around the economy, job creation, as well as civil rights and an end to institutionalized racism and Islamophobia. However, despite these positive gains, we find that there is a small but stable portion of American Muslims who have no intention to vote, even though they're eligible. So 15%, so it's significant. 15% of eligible American Muslims in both 2016 and 2020 say that they do not intend to vote. Now, these are actually eligible voters that say they will not vote, they do not want to vote. And the top two reasons are they don't think their vote matters, they don't think their vote makes a difference, or that they don't see that their priorities are reflected in any candidate. And I think that our discussion today will hopefully show why that is not the case. The idea that your vote doesn't count is simply not true. And American Muslim voters are diverse. As we know, 11% identify as Republican. That's significantly lower than any other faith community. The second, in line, or second most likely to identify as Republicans are Jewish Americans, and they're at around 17%. And it goes higher for every other faith community. American Muslims are on par with non-affiliated Americans, actually, in terms of the percentage who identify as Republican. However, it would be wrong to think that that means everyone else identifies as a Democrat. That's not the case. In 2020, 41% identified as Democrats. It's actually down from 2016. Now, 42% identified as independent. And what that suggests is that American Muslim voters, American Muslims vote has to be earned every single election and can never just be taken for granted. But what we really want to discuss today is going beyond voting. Political engagement and civic engagement that is beyond simply going to the voting booth and voting or sending in your absentee vote. Things like attending a town hall meeting, or volunteering for a campaign, or contributing financially to a campaign. These are the things that some of the things we want to discuss today. So American Muslims are among the most likely to have attended a town hall in the prior year. Interestingly, while American Muslims are slightly less likely than other faith communities to vote, when it comes to more deeper civic engagement, they're actually more likely than other faith communities, which is an interesting it almost seems like a paradox, but what it really means is that there is a small but very engaged segment of the American Muslim community. It's just not as widespread. So more likely than other faith communities to attend a town hall meeting, on par with Jewish Americans to volunteer in a political campaign, and significantly more likely than other faith communities such as Protestants or Catholics, and on par with other faith communities when it comes to donating to a political campaign. With that as kind of the foundation, more broadly, we're going to now hear about a specific story, a really compelling story from Virginia. And I'd like to introduce Azka Mahmood, who's going to be presenting the research. She is an ISPU scholar and educator, as well as CAIR Georgia's Communications and Outreach Director. And she was the primary investigator on this case study and will present the findings.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much, Dalia. I'm just going to share my screen and dive into this research. Iram, can you please give me screen sharing? Thank you. Okay. Can everybody see it? Inshallah, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So thank you, Dalia, for the introduction. This has been a very interesting and rewarding research project, and I'm excited to share the findings with everyone here today. After the 2020 election and the historic voter mobilization that we saw across the country, this moment is exactly right to energize and engage our communities in tried and tested ways. So Dalia has given a solid background of the landscape of the American Muslim voters. Why did we conduct this study? As she mentioned, voter registration and voter turnout are moving in a positive direction. And similarly, more and more American Muslims are launching bids for elected office in recent years at various levels. In 2018, historic numbers of American Muslims ran for office. And most of us know that as of 2020, the US Congress includes 3 American Muslim representatives, which is the highest number of Muslims in Congress in history. But are these numbers truly representative? So Muslims make up an estimated 1% of the total US population, but only 0.6% of Congress. And it's not even just about the numbers. The dearth of American Muslims at all levels of government does not reflect their sizable economic and professional contribution to society. And American Muslim voices are simply not adequately addressed in government, which creates a need for better political representation and participation. So when we think about the goals of increased political engagement, it's not only to increase the number of American Muslims in elected office, but also to have American Muslim voices heard and to influence government policy in all levels of government. And these disparities highlight a persistent, even though narrowing gap in the way American Muslims engage with the political process. And as Dalia mentioned, it's also important to reach the voters that are disengaged and feel unheard and disenfranchised. So for this study, effective political engagement means participation in the processes of governance. This engagement can take several forms. It can be service through voluntary involvement with the civic body, or being designated as an official volunteer or staff for a political campaign. It could be appointment to a government body or fundraising for a political campaign in a systematic way. So specifically, we're looking at political engagement that translates into civic engagement, participation that goes beyond individual actions, such as voting and writing letters, signing petitions, and attending political meetings, which research shows that American Muslims are very engaged in those ways, but we're looking at a step further. And like Dalia said, why we chose to study the state of Virginia, because it was a very unique and successful case. So we selected Virginia because the Virginian Muslim community has made remarkable progress in the years following the first Obama election in 2008. They advanced significantly in public service and representation in government. I mean, the historic wins of Ghazala, Hashmi, and Abrar Umesh are national news. Also remarkably, in the 2018 midterm elections, 8 American Muslims won seats in the Commonwealth of Virginia alone. In particular, for the study, we followed the steps taken by a group of individuals we have dubbed the NOVA group. NOVA is short for Northern Virginia. This group created a platform and kind of an ecosystem to improve their community's political engagement. They had a strategic aim to increase American Muslim participation at local, city, county, state, and national levels through voluntary public service, and they hoped that that would lead to greater appointments and elections for American Muslims. For context, Virginia is home to about 170,000 Muslims, which is about 2% of the state's total population. So based on our interviews and conversations with members of the NOVA group, we got a sense of where the Virginia community was in the pre-2009 era. And we found that despite vigorous participation by American Muslims in the first Obama election, there was no substantial advancement in appointments or representation in government or even long-term engagement. And the NOVA leaders felt that American Muslims only tend to focus on national elections. And even though nationally, Muslims are a small part of the electorate and they hold little influence overall, most American Muslims see voting in elections as the only effective way to participate in politics. They felt that American Muslims pour financial contributions in low impact political races. And if supporting local candidates in local races, American Muslims often back candidates sort of emotionally with poor odds of winning, which results in loss of time and money. And the main lessons that the NOVA group had from the election of President Obama was that first, in the aftermath of the election, it was evident that there were very few tangible gains in representation at the local, state, or national level. So even though they made a lot of effort to elect President Obama, American Muslims did not gain a seat at the table. Second, there was no long-term strategy for sustained local engagement. So the groups and communities that had mobilized for President Obama like never before did not have long-term plans to harness this political momentum. They had put in time and resources into a national election and had no plan to participate in local elections. So this particularly concerned the NOVA group because they knew that disengagement from local civic affairs has been a major hindrance to American Muslims' entrance into politics. And then lastly, they also felt that when American Muslims did participate in political campaigns and supported candidates, they cultivated superficial, transactional, individual relationships that didn't go beyond photo ops. And also, if an American Muslim candidate was elected, it represented individual success and not a communal effort. So based on these observations, the NOVA group came up with a strategic plan. Before we get into the plan, who are the NOVA leaders? They were a small group of South Asian and Arab men who envisioned a political future for American Muslims in their state. They had varied backgrounds belonging to business, technology, health, and even academics. Individually, they were successful professionals, and all of them had served the American Muslim community in their personal capacities for decades. The vision of the group was based on the theory of social change. They believed that individual efforts to create change or solve a social problem have minimal impact, And real, true social change comes from systemic change at the top policy levels, which then works through the individual components of the system. Their focus was to direct American Muslims and their Islamic obligation of service to go beyond traditional philanthropy. Everybody knows American Muslims are great at philanthropy. Muslims on the whole are great at it. But they wanted American Muslims to go into decision-making spaces where the benefit of their time and effort would be multiplied. In the initial days of the planning, importantly, the group set a concrete target. They didn't want to, chase a moving target or keep moving the goalpost. They wanted to have an American Muslim in statewide office, and that is how they measured their success in those days. In terms of core principles, the group took a business approach to their plan, and the core principles are scalability, collaboration, and talent pipeline. In business, scalability refers to multiplication of revenue with minimal incremental cost, which leads to growth. In the political engagement context, the group envisioned progressively lower costs and barriers to entry for each successive American Muslim who would want to enter politics. They wanted to create an environment where American Muslims regularly take part in local politics. It's just a norm for American Muslims. They take part in decision-making, they develop relationships and trust with the greater community, and then they also have a track record of quality leadership and service. The Nova Group believed in collaboration over competition. So in business, a scarcity mindset creates competition for finite resources, even though entities have greater chances of growth through cooperation. And when they applied this principle to political engagement, the Nova Group believed that there's room for all Muslim individuals and organizations, and they should cooperate for ultimate collective benefit. They wanted to move away from personal and recognition-based efforts towards collective goal-orientedness. And finally, the group wanted to develop a talent pipeline. So the Nova leaders saw a lack of polished American Muslim candidates that could hold government appointments, even when the opportunity arose. So they aimed to create a system to encourage American Muslims to serve at lower levels of government with the ability to advance higher if they wished. They also wanted to create a talent pipeline where they would identify qualified American Muslims and guide them toward servant leadership opportunities in their own area of expertise. The hope was that this pipeline would organically produce high quality, trusted, experienced American Muslim leaders, and it would then create a pool of strong candidates for future appointments and elections. With the core principles in place, the group went on to create a strong foundation for effective local political engagement. Now, it's important to remember that the goals of this foundation, and indeed the goal for this whole push, was to expand and not to replace the existing network of American Muslim political influence. The second goal was to create a sustainable stream of collective financial resources that was not based on election cycles alone. So when we talk about one of the components of the foundation, the first component is relationships. Nova leaders understood the importance of genuine relationships. They recognized that for long-term success, it's not feasible to rely on American Muslim candidates alone or to duplicate any kind of effort. So alliances with candidates of other faiths and no faith must be made along with and until more American Muslims entered the political fray. Similarly, the group saw genuine, broad, authentic, long-term policy alignment with candidates in the broader political landscape. They also honored existing long-standing relationships between supportive Virginia politicians and the local Muslim community, where values and policy issues were already aligned and reflected in government. They also supported candidates from other minorities who championed the causes that benefit underserved communities statewide, Muslim or otherwise, again, because the goals were already aligned. To cultivate new strategic relationships, the group created a business association. This business association of minority business owners would connect with political candidates and public officials on domestic issues, such as the economy, jobs, civil liberties, and education. And as Dalia has mentioned, for American Muslims, these are the concerns that are primary to their political concerns. They especially, the Nova Group wanted to especially move away from the perceived Muslim foreign policy issues, even though they were also interested in candidates' voting records on domestic and international issues of interest to the Muslim community. But that was not the only reason for bonding over any policy issue. Nova leaders studied candidates' economic, labor, trade, immigration policies, and they found it much easier to meet with politicians on the basis of economic policy concerns than as a special interest group or as a minority faith community. Now, the group adopted a venture capitalist approach to supporting local candidates. They knew that combined monetary power would go farther than individual contributions. So the first step was that the group found donors within the community to commit a set sum for donation on an ongoing basis, and they created a sustainable pool of financial resources. They also believed in investing donations into multiple campaigns rather than a single race, and made donations after selecting compatible and strategic local campaigns where they knew resources would have maximum impact. Also, the collective contribution method removed personal links to monetary contribution, and it highlighted the Muslim community as a whole and fostered community candidate relationships rather than donor candidate ones. Finally, the NOVA group members were keen not to be recognized or commended as the architects or donors of the strategic push, again, to remove the personal and move to the communal. So I know I've spoken a lot in the past few slides. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm so glad that the ISPU team has put together this handy dandy graphic. So you can see the foundation of relationships and collective capital at the bottom, and the core principles are overarching. And in the next few slides, we'll explain the middle area, which are the pillars or the levers of engagement. The main levers that the NOVA group used were votes, strategic financial support, and volunteers. In terms of votes, we know that even though voting is an extremely important civic duty, the voting numbers of American Muslims alone do not influence the outcome of national elections. Even in swing states, American Muslims cannot change, alone cannot change election results due to their relatively small numbers. But still, when a non-Muslim candidate earned the support of the NOVA group, they did mobilize the community in public and private Muslim spaces, such as mosques and homes. Why did they do that? Because in this way, the community became engaged in down ballot races. The community cultivated authentic relationships with candidates, and candidates became familiar with issues important to the American Muslim community. And if an existing candidate shared and represented the same concerns as the Virginian Muslim community, the community would support that individual rather than using up resources to shore up an American Muslim contender. So following this principle, the group encouraged American Muslims to respect and protect established relationships and conserve limited resources. What is strategic financial support in this local context? So the NOVA group vetted candidates and deployed their collective financial resources from their combined pool strategically across different viable candidacies rather than investing in one race. They focused on energizing different sets of people and developing several relationships rather than banking on just one candidate. And the group supported local candidates early on in a contest when monetary contributions were scarce and much needed. In the early months of a political campaign, even smaller donations are impactful. And also in comparison with a national level race, an amount that would be just a drop in the national bucket would be much more significant to a local candidate. And the third thing was that in the formative period of a campaign, the group offered funding for staff and volunteers and recommended suitable picks from the American Muslim community. So they utilized community financial resources to support a candidate and also created an opportunity for American Muslims to gain important real-world political experience while helping their faith and statewide community. In terms of volunteers, the group's call to volunteer and serve the broader community was rooted in Islamic teachings of khidmat, which is service to humanity without expectation of return. And NOVA group members themselves stepped up to serve on several state boards, even at personal cost. NOVA group leaders knew that the American Muslim community's long-term and effective political engagement would require a paradigm shift where the community would view political engagement as a way of life, as a norm. So the group worked to change American Muslim attitudes about careers and politics. Now, in a community where public service or politics is considered as an alternative career choice, this is quite a battle. Additionally, the NOVA Group's business association staff studied vacancies on citizen volunteer boards at local, city, and state levels across Virginia, and then they attempted to match qualified candidates from the American Muslim community to fill them. And finally, we come to the results in civic engagement, appointments, elections, and the talent pipeline, and see whether the NOVA Group's efforts bore fruit. In terms of civic engagement, these efforts have fared quite well. When the group began to organize, their staff recorded fewer than 10 board positions filled by American Muslims across the state. As of 2020, Muslims in Virginia serve on nearly 100 civic boards at city, county, and state levels. They advocate for healthcare, human rights, unemployment, racial discrimination, and a host of other issues. In Virginia, Muslims now represent thousands of citizens and supervise the activities of hundreds of organizations. So I'm just going to take some names of some organizations that they're involved with. There are many, many more, but these are just what I have on hand. So they're involved in the local Human Rights Commission, Department of Medical Assistance Services, Asian Advisory Board, Real Estate Board, Funeral Home Board, and professional association boards for physicians, dentists, nurses, and lawyers. There are at least 3 Muslim county commissioners in the state, and Muslims are represented in multiple school boards, city councils, boards of trustees of higher education institutes, and community colleges. Now, there's immense impact of influencing policies through service on civic board. For example, just in Virginia, by serving on the Department of Medical Assistance Services, American Muslims have been part of an initiative to offer free meals to an additional 500,000 impoverished children at no extra cost to the state. Similarly, American Muslim volunteers have been able to affect Medicaid expansion through the board and serve an additional 400,000 adults in Virginia. In terms of appointments, and in the interest of time, I'm just going to outline one of the several success stories, which is the appointment of Atif Kearney as Virginia Secretary of Education by Governor Ralph Northam. That case showcases the NOVA Group's planning in action. Atif moved to Virginia in 2005, and he served in the US Marine Corps. He worked as a paralegal in an international law firm, and then he began a career as a teacher of civics and US history. The NOVA Group recommended Atif as a campaign volunteer for several local races. In 2015, Atif ran for the Virginia Senate but lost. However, his presence in the civic arena left a mark. And in 2018, Atif became a member of the Virginia Governor's Cabinet as Secretary of Education. So Atif now heads the operations of the Education Secretariat. And despite his electoral losses, overall, Atif Kearney's story is of a success because he demonstrates the power of volunteerism and service. He's able to earn a living through public service, and he's well positioned to be a force for positive change statewide. In terms of elections, there's a long list of successful runs made by American Muslims on your screens. So Bhuta Bibaraj, Ghazala Hashmi, Babar Latif, Haris, and the list goes on, and I believe this is only the beginning. The talent pipeline has also been highly effective, and I'm just going to highlight one of the 2 cases. Luckily we're joined here by Zaki Barzinji, inshallah, so perhaps we can talk about his experiences a bit later. But just his backstory, Zaki is a young adult Muslim from Virginia, and he was initially recommended by the NOVA Group as a staffer for gubernatorial candidate Terry McAuliffe. Zaki was then appointed as a technology policy advisor, later as deputy director of intergovernmental affairs for Governor McAuliffe, and he subsequently became senior associate director of public engagement. He served as the White House liaison to Muslim American communities and other faiths. And the support and relationship of the NOVA Group for candidate McAuliffe facilitated Zaki's entrance into public service, and now Zaki is a major mover and shaker in the American Muslim community, mashallah. So over the years, several American Muslim candidates have emerged organically. And, speaking to the sustainability and the future of this group, the emergence and success of individuals and campaigns independent of the NOVA Group demonstrates the scalability and sustainability of their model. In Virginia, now the individual cost to enter the political arena is much lower for new people to enter in politics. And voters are no longer faced by minority candidates or Muslim sounding names. They're just familiar with the American Muslim community. Will the NOVA model be sustainable in the long run? So we know that the creation of at least one more strategic group has taken inspiration from the NOVA Group. In the state capital of Richmond, a number of American Muslims have organized following the 2016 election of President Donald Trump. Richmond Muslims cultivated interfaith alliances and partnership with other minority organizations and compatible local political groups and candidates. They mobilized the local American Muslim community for candidates for local elections. They mobilized community members for delegate Sam Rasool and Ghazala Hashmi. And they are also developing alliances with the Secretary of Education out of Kearney since his appointment in 2018. And they continue to refine their strategic vision and growth plans. In terms of the future of the NOVA group, the core NOVA group members saw their role to be of an initial catalyst. And to them, their success is reflected in the ongoing increase in organic civic engagement in the American Muslim communities. And so in many ways, the group members have achieved their goal. However, they remain committed to empower American Muslims to serve their country and participate in civic and political processes more fully. They also wish to assist other American Muslim communities in tapping into their local talents and abilities to recreate this bottom-up success of Virginia through advisory activities. The group also have other diverse initiatives going on as well. For instance, the NOVA group began the Minority Student Leadership Program to plant the seeds of future civic engagement and social understanding. This particular program brings inner city and suburban youth together to nurture relationships that cross socioeconomic lines. They build connections and social and emotional intelligence. And in this way and through other initiatives, the group aims to promote leadership skills, build resilience, and nurture coalitions. So finally, the lessons learned from this report is to set tangible goals, develop a strategy and supportive systems. In their case, it was a professional association and collective capital. They use levers of local engagement strategically, votes, investment, and volunteers. They undertook community outreach and education to shift attitudes about careers in politics. They conducted analysis and reflection, and the one way to create future sustainability is to create avenues for sustainability of your vision. And with that, I will end my presentation.
Thank you so much, Azka. I think the story of what happened in Virginia is one that I'm so proud to have had a role in documenting. I had no role in making it happen, but so proud that we were able to document it because it's such an important story for American Muslim civic engagement in the history of our community. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce our next panelist who's going to sort of respond to this. Zaki Barzinji. He is the former Senior Associate Director of Public Engagement and served as the White House liaison to Muslim American communities as well as other faiths. Prior to joining the White House, he served as Deputy Director of Intergovernmental Affairs for Governor Terry McAuliffe of Virginia. Zaki? All right, wonderful. So my question to you, Zaki, is, you just heard the retelling of your story, a story that you played such a critical part in. And ISPU's research shows that American Muslims are more civically engaged than some other communities in attending town hall meetings, volunteering, and contributing to political campaigns, and participating really beyond voting. With that in mind, is the ecosystem that was created in Virginia by American Muslims to improve their community's political engagement, can it be replicated in other Muslim communities across the nation? And then what do you think was the most important lesson from this experience, from this group's work?
Yeah, thanks, Salam, Dalia, and Azka, and everyone else on this call. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to ISPU for doing this work, for documenting everything, and honestly making the work that was done in Virginia sound even more exciting and impactful than I think any of us even realized at the time. So it's a tremendous service, and we're very grateful and appreciative of that. Look, my own role was, a small part of everything that happened in Virginia, and I think it's important to say that everything that Azka just presented was the build off of decades and decades of work, not just in Virginia, but across the country by Muslim American leaders and institutions before us. So I would say to the first question, yes, I think that what was done in Virginia is not especially unique to the environment there. It's absolutely replicable. I think to the second question, what was the sort of the main lesson we learned? I think that the overarching principle and everything that you heard Azka present and everything that we kind of learned firsthand is that, there are many different avenues for building political power for our community. And most of them can be and should be complementary. We all move forward together when we recognize the different roles and strengths that we have within our own community. And in the case of Virginia, I think we took a hard look and we knew that there was already a lot of work that was being done when it came to advocacy around what, some segments of our community might consider to be, Muslim issues. There was a lot of work already being done at the grassroots level to register and mobilize Muslim voters. And so because those two lanes, there's already a lot of good work happening when it came to advocacy and voter mobilization. We decided to instead focus on the development of two things, which is, and as Azka kind of went over, Muslim talent, and then also leveraging Muslim capital. And by doing that, as Azka was saying, we weren't trying to reinvent or contradict what was already being done, but to rather complement it. And I think the focus on building a talent pipeline from the ground up is exactly the kind of approach that could be taken across the country. I think one of the challenges that we face as a community right now is, very justifiably, we see a lack of representation of our community at the highest levels of government. And we, are justifiably upset and disappointed that we're not further than we are. But I think the real lesson is that you can't just jump to national representation. You have to build it up from the ground up. And so that's why among the different things that we did in Virginia, one of the main things was identifying talent within the community, both at the entry level, young staffers, young Muslims who are willing to go into politics and policy, and then also mid-level and senior professionals. So people who are at the height of their industry, who are also in the community, who maybe not necessarily have been involved in politics or government before, getting them to be more active in engaging in government from the ground up. That was kind of the key to our success. So like Azka said, one of the main projects that we did in Virginia was identifying the fact that at the county level, you have all of these different boards and commissions that advise county government on a wide variety of topics. There's healthcare agencies, there's consumer protection commissions, there are human rights commissions, and at least in Virginia, for most of our counties, there's a lot of vacancies. There's not enough people volunteering to step up and advise your government on very specific issues and topics. And so we just did a very basic catalog of who do we have in our community that has the expertise to fill these kinds of positions on government advisory boards. And that's why we were able to very quickly have success, because these were vacancies that were existing. We were able to find talent within the community. Again, these are people who are not necessarily, political activists or policy people, but they are experts in their field, whether it's, lawyers, whether it's healthcare professionals, and we got them appointed to boards and commissions. And so very quickly, we were able to kind of build representation of the community at the local level. And then what happens is you start building a step-by-step ladder so that, when a new governor took office, we were able to then say, hey, these are people in our community who are already serving on local boards and commissions. They've been vetted, they're qualified, they'd be great to serve now on state level boards and commissions. And then, after having served your government in a volunteer capacity, what it sets you up to do is, if you want to ever run for political office in the future, you now have a basis, a platform of engagement and advising the community that you can run off of. So for us, it was very important that we focus on a strategic step-by-step process of increasing American Muslim representation by focusing on talent. And then the other side of it is sort of the capital thing. As Azka mentioned, one of the things that was created in Virginia was a trade organization of Muslim-owned businesses in Virginia. And what we realized through approaching engagement with political officials as business owners is that you can actually get audiences with policymakers who otherwise might not pay attention to you as a community. And all the business owners that we brought to the table to have conversations with elected officials, they all 100% supported all the traditional Muslim issues that we all support. But because they were able to talk about those issues from a perspective as a business owner, oftentimes we were able to see actually more movement on the core objectives, policy objectives that we have than we would have if it was done through a more kind of traditional grassroots advocacy approach. So really the success, to the extent that we had success in Virginia, I think really is dependent on this idea of focusing on talent over issues, and also talent over, votes to some extent. And not to say that you do one over the other, it's just that, at the end of the day, as much as we're all very excited to see Muslim turnout, voter turnout, skyrocket, at the end of the day, we're still a tiny percentage of the population. And so for us to be able to have an outsized impact that transcends that tiny percentage of the population that we represent, we have to look at other avenues. So if we don't have the sheer numbers, we do have, talent. And if we can improve and amplify and elevate that talent, again, from the bottom all the way up to the top of careers, that's how we're going to institutionalize our power as a community. And that's ultimately how we're going to see, policies and actions that better represent and reflect what our community, represents and wants. So I'm curious to hear definitely, more conversation and questions from the audience, but I think those are the main lessons that we learned.
Thank you so much, Zaki. That was definitely the part that fascinated me the most when you told me the story way back. I don't even remember when, 1,000 years ago, when we used to meet in coffee shops and have conversations face to face, but it was in the good old, the BC area, before Corona. But I was really struck by the simplicity, but the brilliance of just tapping into Muslim talent and having them serve on these commissions that need that talent and are often left unharnessed and unaddressed. And it's something that exists all over the country. This could happen, this could be applied, this exact same strategy can be applied anywhere, really.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'm going to turn now to Edward. Edward Ahmed Mitchell is the Deputy Director at CAIR National and the former Executive Director at CAIR Georgia. Edward, we know that all eyes were on Georgia on January 5th. What elements did you see from the story we just heard about the Virginia community organizing? What elements from the Virginia story were present in Georgia, if any? And what do you think can be learned from both of these cases?
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, Dalia, and thank you so much to ISPU for hosting this event and inviting us to participate. Greatly appreciated. So let me start by saying a few things. Number one, I just want to give you a bit of a background about the state of Georgia and our population and the Muslim community here, just so you kind of understand the context. There are some similarities to the Virginia community and some differences. And then I'm just going to highlight about 10 things that I think the Muslim community in Georgia has done over the past 4 years. Some of them are, I think, similar to what has been done in Virginia. So first, for those of you who have not lived in Georgia, who didn't camp out here for the past 2 months leading up to the Senate runoff, and some people did. There are about 150,000 Georgia Muslims. That's our estimate. And we estimate anywhere between 60 to 75,000 registered Muslim voters in the state of Georgia. Now, most Georgia Muslims are concentrated in the metro Atlanta area, many African-American Muslims concentrated in Atlanta proper, and then many more Muslims around the northern suburbs around Atlanta, and then smaller but significant communities of Muslims in Savannah and Albany, which is Savannah's on the coast, Albany is further in South Georgia. So we have a pretty significant population of Georgia Muslims in our state. But if you go look back to, say, 2014, was the community very politically and civically engaged? I wouldn't say very. I think in Atlanta proper, especially the African-American Muslim community, yes. That's a historic community that's been around for decades and very well represented in the city, very well connected within the city of Atlanta. But if you look at the broader state of Georgia and the broader Muslim community, were we very politically engaged, very civically engaged? Not as much as anyone wanted to be. And so what you really saw in, I think, starting in 2015, a quick escalation in political and civic engagement by the Muslim community. And so I want to first highlight just a few of the organizations that have been doing this work. The Georgia Muslim Voter Project, IPAC, the Independent Political Action Committee, CAIR Georgia, my former home, the Georgia Muslims for a Blue Senate, and many Voices of Muslims and many other groups that I could mention. And so if you look at the trajectory from 2015 to 2020, leading up to this remarkable election result that we had in the presidential race and the Senate race, and the role that Muslims played in it, I want to note a few things that I observed Georgia Muslims doing, and obviously to some extent participated in when I was participating as the director of CAIR Georgia. So number one, in the state of Georgia, what you really saw is these groups that popped up 2016, 2017, 2018, new groups that were dedicated to political and civic engagement, cooperating with each other. No one's working in a silo, just doing something by themselves. People are coordinating with each other. And just as one example, you actually have the Georgia Muslim Voter Project and CAIR Georgia sharing an office together in the same office suite. And so when there were opportunities to collaborate, the collaboration happened, and not competition, but collaboration. And so I think that's something that it sounds like has been done in Virginia quite well. And that's something that has been done quite well in the state of Georgia. And you'll see that with the other groups as well. If they host an event, they'll invite other Muslim groups to attend and vice versa. So making sure that there's coordination. And that really got kicked into high gear during the Senate race. So what essentially happened somewhat organically is all the nonprofit Muslim organizations that engage in politics and civic work, they formed a temporary coalition to maximize Georgia Muslim voter turnout. That was all they focused on, not just the registering voters, but maximizing the turnout, engaging with the candidates, educating the community about the candidates' positions. That was the nonprofit work. And then separately, Muslim leaders who were interested in donating to candidates, endorsing particular candidates, getting particular candidates elected, they formed a coalition together to coordinate their work. No one was in charge of either coalition. No one was the big man on the scene, but there was just that ability to have conversations, coordinate with each other, trying to reach the same goal. So that coordination has been critical in the state of Georgia. The next thing I want to note that's very important is not just waiting for an election to happen to do the work, right? Working between election cycles, right? You don't just wait until there's a presidential election, then you suddenly want to get into gear, but no, you've got these organizations and communities, and the masajid as well, by the way, doing the work between election cycles. So you've seen mosques in Georgia, masajid in Georgia, hosting candidate forums, lobbying at the state capitol, hosting events with state legislators, hosting our Visit a Mosque Day every year for several years running, and inviting elected officials to attend those events. That was all happening between election cycles, and there was no campaign going on, just building those ties with elected officials, potential candidates, and emphasizing to the community the need not just to be politically engaged during an election, but civically engaged throughout the year. So that is something that really was kicked into high gear 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. The next thing I want to note is directly engaging with candidates and expected candidates. So the Georgia Muslim community held their first lobbying day, unified lobbying day at the state capitol in 2019. There had been small lobbying efforts at the Capitol. CAIR Georgia was there. Georgia Muslim Voter Project were always there. But we got Georgia Muslims around the state to get together to lobby at the state Capitol. And that was a really important testing ground for that kind of united collaboration. Our dear friend Aisha Yaqub and Mortaza Khwaja helped to lead that effort. And then also, I think the one thing that's been nice is that when a candidate said something that was problematic for the Muslim community, in the past, you might have to just put out a press release and hope someone noticed it. But now, because the Georgia Muslim community had done the hard work of building connections with the candidates, you could pick up the phone and directly engage with the candidate. So I'll give you two examples. When Stacey Abrams was running for governor, she came under criticism from pro-Israel groups because she, as a state representative, had voted against a bill that would have essentially made it very difficult for people who boycott the Israeli government to get jobs working for the state of Georgia. She voted against that for free speech reasons. Then when she ran for office, she put out an editorial explaining why she voted that way. And in the editorial, she was very solicitous of pro-Israel groups. And at some point, she described the BDS movement as anti-Semitic, or said it had anti-Semitic underpinnings, which is obviously very offensive, not only to Muslims, but many Jewish people who support the boycott movement. So we didn't have to put out a statement criticizing her. Georgia Muslims got together, had a meeting with her, very productive, positive meeting, and discussed that issue. Same thing with Congresswoman Lucy McBath. There was an issue that occurred with her, just sat down, met with her, talked it out. So that ability to directly engage with candidates and not just talk about candidates is very important, something the community has built. Next thing I want to highlight is not just the focus on registering voters and then thinking you've done a good job, but turning out voters, because we have an untold number of Muslims who have been registered to vote for years, but don't actually turn out to vote. And so what you saw, especially in this last election cycle, that was maybe a bit different than 2016. I think in 2016, there was an assumption, yeah, Muslims are obviously going to try to vote. It's an important election. But I think in 2018, 2020, there was a realization that just because someone's registered to vote does not mean they're actually going to turn out to vote. And so you saw Muslim groups literally going door to door well after the registration period was over to turn out not just Muslims, but anyone in that neighborhood that might be in an area that has a mosque, that has a large Muslim population. So again, focusing on the turning out, not just the registering of voters. Another thing that I want to note is pooling donations for a bigger symbolic impact. I think during the presentation, Azka made a very good point, which is that Muslim groups in Virginia recognize that sometimes, a candidate throwing money at a campaign or candidate may not make a big difference, especially if the candidate is already well funded, right? But I think one of the things that the Georgia Muslim community has done, especially a group of Voices of Muslims, is to recognize that if you get Muslims who want to donate to a candidate and you bundle the donations, like you have someone coordinating those donations and making sure the candidate knows that all these little small donations you got, these are coordinated, these are coming from the Muslim community, that does have a symbolic impact. It does, sadly, that is a way to get access to candidates and to elected officials. It's not the way it should be, but it is what it is. And so I think there was a very concerted effort to do that in Georgia, not just to throw money at campaigns and hope someone notices, but to, compile that money and donate it and hopefully make a big symbolic difference. I know I'm running out of time, so I'll wrap up very briefly, inshallah. Another thing I want to note is overcoming defeat. In 2016, I think the Muslim community was very energetic, very hopeful about having a big impact in Georgia. And obviously, anti-Muslim extremists were elected up and down the ballot. And our community did not become depressed by that. We didn't give up. In fact, we had one candidate who was running for office and doubled down and just went back into the hard work of getting people registered and turned out to vote. So I think overcoming defeat was a very important thing that the community has done. Okay, and then a few more things I want to mention is that in the Senate race that you saw, you actually had Muslims working in the campaign. So we had Muslims working in the John Ossoff campaign. We had a Muslim managing Daniel Blackman's campaign, which was also on the January 5th runoff that happened. And so it was very important to not only have Muslims as volunteers, not only Muslims meeting with candidates, but literally Muslims working for these candidates. That was very important so that our voice is being heard within the campaign. And finally, last thing I want to mention is that a synergy between the youth and the quote unquote older generation, right? Our older generation, they've got in some cases, the money, right? They may have a little more time because they've already succeeded in their careers, but they recognize as well that the youth knows the technology, has the energy, has the connections. And so there's been great synergy in Georgia between our older generation, our younger generation, with the older generation bankrolling a lot of this work and supporting a lot of this work and empowering young people, identifying the young people who have the talent, have the experience, getting them involved, and as was discussed, putting them in that talent pipeline so that you're building them up to the point where maybe they'll be able to run for office one day. So when I look at what was done in Virginia, I see a lot of similarities, but I also see a lot of things that were done that haven't been done in Georgia yet. So I know there are Georgia Muslims who are going to be watching this presentation and will learn from what has been done in Virginia to great effect. But I think in Georgia as well, there are some unique things that have been done, some positive things that have been done. And I think all that contributed to the unique election results that you saw in November and in January here in the state of Georgia. Mashallah.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot from your presentation, Edward. And Some things I noted down that I think are just like universal principles of civic engagement that we should all take note of is the importance of collaboration, not trying to do it all by yourself, coordinating efforts, establishing institutions so that you're working all the time between election cycles. It's not something that you're reacting, oh my God, there's an election, and you start the work then. And then the power of pooling donations. So coordinating across effort and across organized money. So it's organized resources and organized effort. And then the importance of engaging and engaging candidates. You have a personal relationship, and working on campaigns, volunteering and contributing, but getting into campaigns so that you actually have a voice in what happens. And those things you share with Virginia, and I think that they are universal principles that anyone watching this, no matter where you are, can learn from and pull into their own state and their own context. So we just have a very limited time, but I'd like to get some questions from the audience. You can type your question into the Q&A box. So one question here from Saeed. As I listen to what is being said, I foresee a continuation of the lack of representation of inner city communities. What efforts are being made to make sure inner city community leaders are being pushed forward, especially African-American and Latinx? We'll start with that one. Really any of our panelists. Azka, if you could get back on video for the Q&A segment.
Well, I can just say very briefly that this is, I think it's identified in the report that Azka put together and others. It was a major blind spot, at least for us in Virginia, that we, it was primarily immigrant Muslims, South Asian and Arab, who were doing this work. And there was, not just, there's a racial blind spot, there's also a gender blind spot in terms of the number of the types of people who are involved in our work. And it absolutely has to be addressed. And I do think that the work that, so I think that because we focus on Muslim talent, Muslim capital in Northern Virginia, there is a natural synergy, I think, with other communities who have talent, but not necessarily the capital. There's synergy that could be had between, like the Northern Virginia group, for example, and folks in Maryland, right? Where you have, again, you have the numbers, you have a large population of voters. They don't necessarily have the same access to capital, but they do have the talent and energy. So there has to be intersectional work across the board within our community. And I think the other point that I'll just make real quick is that it's also why it's so important that we don't get hung up on these traditional ideas of Muslim issues, because often when we talk about Muslim issues, they are really issues that are only specific to a very small subset of the overall Muslim community. And a lot of the issues that we tend to talk about and advocate on aren't necessarily those being faced by, for example, Muslim communities in the inner city. So I think these are blind spots that we're beginning to address more, but definitely there's a lot more work that needs to be done. And I think that's definitely a big area of improvement. And I think that there is potential for collaboration, cross collaboration.
Okay, great.
I'll add briefly, if I may, that, in Georgia, what's unique is that we have a very large African-American Muslim population centered not just in Atlanta, but around the state, but definitely very much empowered there. But you also have so-called Muslims of an immigrant background, especially in the northern side of Atlanta and other communities. And so, when I first joined as the director of CAIR Georgia in 2016, I noticed some quiet tension, that people would allude to, all the issues that we know about in the Muslim community from the past. But really what you saw in 2015, 2016, I thought was in the quote unquote immigrant Muslim community was a recognition that the African-American community, including the African-American Muslim community, knows how to do political and civic engagement. They've been doing this for decades. And so there was, in our state anyway, I think really a great effort to learn from the Black community and also work with the Black community. So if you're holding an event, you try to make sure you're including the Black community. If you're launching some effort, you try to make sure you're including. Is that happening all the time? Is it happening the level it needs to happen? No, not yet. But I observed this myself. There really was that very coordinated attempt to do that. And the other thing, last thing I'll say is that for our community anyway, to us, a Muslim issue, police brutality is a Muslim issue. Palestine is also a Muslim issue, and it doesn't have to be that you have to choose between either one. And so in our community, as a Black man, I care very much about the freedom of the Palestinian people and our government's support of their oppression. And I also care very much about the police brutality against my neighbors and people who look like me right here at home. And I think in Georgia, we've really seen that. I haven't seen a lot of conflict between, those immigrants, they only care about Yemen or Libya or Egypt or Palestine. They need to talk about this. What I've seen is immigrant Muslims in Georgia making a really concerted effort to address local issues, not ignoring the international issues, but really address the things you can impact directly yourself in the state of Georgia, which is local things happening right here. And also to the extent international issues are relevant, I mentioned the issue with BDS and Stacey earlier, addressing those issues as well. So it doesn't have to be either one, it can be all of these at the same time, inshallah.
I wanted to add a quick note to that. As somebody who wrote I was able to speak to the NOVA group. Over time, they have moved and understood that there were blind spots existing. And, the project for matching inner city children with suburban children or youth and creating those collaborative environments speaks to that blind spot, and they're working to overcome that. And then in recent months in Georgia, I definitely saw the collaboration in, at work, because there were a lot of communities that overlap either ethnically or faith communities, and we were able to collaborate with them and not have to duplicate effort and be more effective and efficient. So these things are definitely moving in the right direction, I would say.
Great, thank you. That's a really important point. Thank you, Said, for your question. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. If you could please take a minute to fill out a very quick survey about the effectiveness of this webinar and its utility to you. We're just going to put it up right now. You can just take it right on your Zoom screen. And we're also going to post some additional resources in the chat box, including a briefing book on American Muslims that you can pass on to your elected official or anyone soliciting your support for their candidacy. This is a briefing book on American Muslims, who we are and what we believe. It's just a good tool for folks who want to engage with the community to understand who we are and what our priorities are and what we believe, to help them better serve their Muslim constituents. And those resources will be posted right in the chat box. Thank you so much for joining us today. And this webinar will be reposted on Facebook and YouTube, so you can also share it with folks who weren't able to make it.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.